I lost my company and knocked on my son's door with a suitcase. His wife didn't even open the gate. Dad, my wife doesn't want a failure living here for free. I slept in my car, shivering. At 5 a.m., a Rolls-Royce pulled up to my window. The driver rolled down the glass and said, "Mr. Blackwell is about to pass away. Before that, he needs you to sign the will." What happened next changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Russell, and at 64 years old, I never imagined I would be sleeping in my car like a homeless man. But here I was, parked outside my son's house at 2 in the morning, shivering under an old jacket that smelled of the failed dreams I had left behind. 3 weeks ago, I had everything. Blackwell Construction Services had been my life's work for 37 years. I built it from nothing, working 18-hour days, missing school plays and birthday parties, always telling myself it was for Dennis's future. The company employed 43 people, and we had contracts lined up through the next 2 years. I was proud of what I had built, proud that I could leave something meaningful to my son. Then it all collapsed in a matter of days. The bank called in our loans without warning. 3 major clients canceled contracts simultaneously, claiming breach of service standards that made no sense. Our insurance company suddenly found violations in policies we had maintained for over a decade. Within 72 hours, everything I had worked for was gone. The lawyers said there was nothing to be done. The bankruptcy proceedings moved faster than I could understand. I lost the house first, then the car, then my dignity. At 64, I found myself with nothing but a beaten-up Toyota that barely started and a suitcase containing everything I owned. I had nowhere else to go except to Dennis. My relationship with my son had been strained since he married Jessica 5 years ago. She was beautiful, educated, and made it clear from the beginning that she thought Dennis could do better than carrying on his father's blue-collar legacy. Dennis, who had once talked about joining the business, suddenly decided he wanted to work in finance instead. I tried to be supportive, even though it hurt to see him walk away from everything I had built for him. But blood is blood, right? When you have nowhere else to turn, family is supposed to be there. That's what I kept telling myself as I drove to their house in Westfield, the nice suburb where they had bought their 4-bedroom colonial with the money I had lent them for the down payment. Money I would never see again, now. I knocked on the front door at 7 in the evening, my suitcase in one hand, my pride in tatters. Through the glass panels beside the door, I could see Dennis and Jessica sitting at their dining room table. They saw me too. I watched my son's face change from surprise to something else, something that looked like annoyance. Jessica got up first, walking to the door but not opening it. Instead, she spoke through the glass, her voice muffled but clear enough to cut through what was left of my heart. "Russell, we know about the business. Dennis told me you'd probably come here." I pressed my face closer to the glass. "Jessica, honey, I just need a place to stay for a few days. Just until I can figure things out. I won't be any trouble." She shook her head, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light from their expensive chandelier. "We can't do that. We have our own lives to think about, our own responsibilities." Behind her, Dennis appeared. My son, my only child, the boy I had taught to throw a baseball, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had paid without complaint, even when it meant taking out a second mortgage. "Dad," he said, not even having the decency to open the door, "Jessica's right, we can't have you staying here. It wouldn't be good for either of us." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Dennis, I'm your father. I lost everything. I have nowhere else to go." "That's not our fault," Jessica said quickly. "We didn't make the decisions that led to this. We can't be expected to clean up your mess." Dennis nodded, actually nodded in agreement with her. "Maybe you should contact social services. They have programs for people in your situation." People in my situation. Like I was some stranger asking for a handout, not the man who had worked himself into the ground to give him every opportunity. "I raised you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I gave you everything I had." "And we appreciate that," Jessica said in the tone you might use with a persistent salesperson, "but we have our own future to think about. We can't afford to support someone else right now. Surely you understand?" I looked at my son's face through the glass, searching for some sign of the boy who used to wait for me to come home from work, who would run to greet me at the door. All I saw was a stranger wearing his face. "Please," I said, hating how the words sounded coming from my mouth, "just for a few nights." Jessica crossed her arms. "Russell, we've made our decision. You need to leave now." They walked away from the door, just walked away, leaving me standing there with my suitcase and my shattered faith in the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I stood there for another 10 minutes, hoping Dennis would come back, hoping he would change his mind. But the lights in the house gradually went out, and I realized I was truly alone. I made it to my car before the tears came. 64 years old, crying like a child in the front seat of a Toyota that might not start in the morning. I had given my son everything, and when I needed him most, he had given me nothing. The night was cold for October, and I only had a thin jacket. I tried to sleep, but every position was uncomfortable. My back ached, my legs cramped, and every sound made me think someone was going to call the police on the old man sleeping in his car. I watched the windows of Dennis's house, hoping against hope that he would come out, that he would remember who I was and what I meant to him. He never did. As dawn approached, I thought about the choices that had led me here. All those years working late, all those missed dinners, all those sacrifices I had made for a future that no longer existed. I had built a successful business, but I had failed at the one thing that mattered most. I had raised a son who could look his own father in the eye and turn him away. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had worked so hard to give Dennis a better life that I had forgotten to teach him what family meant. I had given him everything except the values that would have made him the kind of man who wouldn't abandon his father in his darkest hour. As I sat there in the growing light, watching the suburbs wake up around me, I wondered if this was how it would end. An old man with nothing, forgotten by the people who should have mattered most. I had spent my entire life building something lasting, but in the end I had built nothing at all. The morning traffic began to pick up, and I knew I couldn't stay parked here much longer. Soon the neighbors would start to notice, and Jessica would probably call the police to have me removed. Even in my desperation, I couldn't bear the thought of that final humiliation. I started the car, grateful when it actually turned over, and began driving with no destination in mind. I had maybe $50 in my wallet and a quarter tank of gas. In a few hours, I would need to make some decisions about where to spend the next night and the night after that. But as I drove away from my son's house, something inside me hardened. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding, but underneath it, something else was growing. I had survived 64 years on this earth, built a company from nothing, and overcome obstacles that would have broken weaker men. Maybe this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the beginning of a chapter I never saw coming. I had no idea how right I was. I spent that entire first day driving around aimlessly, stopping at a McDonald's for a cup of coffee that I nursed for 3 hours, trying to figure out what came next. The reality of being homeless at 64 was sinking in with every passing hour. I couldn't afford a motel room, and sleeping in the car was only a temporary solution before someone reported me as a vagrant. By evening, I found myself parked in a 24-hour Walmart parking lot. I had heard that some stores allowed people to sleep in their cars overnight, though I wasn't sure if that was true. The fluorescent lights from the store cast an eerie glow across the asphalt, and I watched families loading groceries into their cars, going home to warm houses and people who cared about them. I tried to eat a granola bar I had found in my glove compartment, but my stomach was too knotted with anxiety to keep anything down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dennis's face through that glass door, the way he had looked at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than his father who needed help. The second night was worse than the first. The temperature dropped into the 40s, and my old jacket might as well have been made of paper. I ran the engine periodically to get some heat, but I was afraid of running out of gas or drawing attention to myself. Security guards patrol these lots, and the last thing I needed was to be arrested for trespassing. I must have dozed off sometime after midnight because I was startled awake by the sound of a car door closing. Through my foggy windows, I could see a large black sedan had parked next to me. My heart started racing. This was it. Security was going to kick me out, maybe even call the police. But as my vision cleared, I realized it wasn't a security car. It was a Rolls-Royce, pristine and elegant, completely out of place in a Walmart parking lot at 5 in the morning. The driver was an elderly black man in a crisp uniform, and he was walking toward my car with purpose. I rolled down my window as he approached, my hands shaking from cold and nerves. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a cultured voice. "Are you Russell Henderson?" I stared at him, completely confused. No one had called me by my full name in years. Everyone just called me Russell or Mr. Henderson, but yes, Henderson was my legal name. "Yes," I said slowly. "How did you know?" "Mr. Blackwell has been looking for you, sir. He's quite urgent that you come with me immediately." Blackwell. The name hit me like a physical blow, dragging up memories I had buried for decades. Harold Blackwell. I hadn't thought about him in years, hadn't seen him in even longer. He had been my supervisor when I first started in construction, back when I was 22 years old and desperate for any kind of steady work. "Harold Blackwell?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir, Mr. Harold Blackwell. He's dying, sir, and he's asked specifically for you. He says it's about his will and that time is of the essence." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. Harold Blackwell was still alive. He had to be in his 80s by now, maybe even his 90s, and why would he want to see me? We had worked together for less than 2 years, over 4 decades ago. "I don't understand," I said. "Why would he want to see me?" The driver's expression softened slightly. "Sir, I don't know all the details, but Mr. Blackwell has been quite insistent. He says there are things that need to be settled before he passes, and that you're the only one who can help him with certain legal documents." I looked down at myself, aware of how I must appear. I hadn't showered in 2 days. I was wearing the same clothes I had slept in, and I probably smelled like desperation and failure. "I'm not exactly presentable," I said. "Mr. Blackwell specifically said that wouldn't matter, sir. He said to find you regardless of your circumstances and bring you to him immediately." The whole situation felt surreal. 2 days ago, I had been rejected by my own son, and now some phantom from my distant past was summoning me like I mattered to someone. Part of me wondered if I was hallucinating from exhaustion and stress. "Where is he?" I asked. "St. Mary's Hospital, sir, the private wing. He's been asking for you for the past week." A week. He had been looking for me for a week, which meant he had somehow learned about my situation. But how? And more importantly, why did he care? I hesitated, looking back at my car with its collection of everything I owned in the world stuffed into the back seat. What if this was some kind of mistake? What if I left my car here and it got towed? I would lose the last thing I had. The driver seemed to sense my concern. "Sir, I can arrange for your vehicle to be stored safely. Mr. Blackwell has asked me to ensure that all your needs are taken care of." The kindness in his voice nearly broke me. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with genuine concern that I had almost forgotten what it felt like. "Okay," I said finally. "Let me get my things." I grabbed my suitcase and the few important papers I had managed to salvage from the bankruptcy proceedings. The driver took my suitcase without being asked and placed it in the trunk of the Rolls-Royce with the same care he might handle fine china. The interior of the car was like nothing I had ever experienced. Leather seats softer than any furniture I had owned, climate control that immediately warmed my aching bones, and a silence that seemed to wrap around me like an embrace. I found myself fighting back tears at the simple comfort of being warm and clean and treated like a human being. "Sir," the driver said as we pulled out of the parking lot, "might I ask when you last had a proper meal?" I couldn't remember. The granola bar, maybe some crackers the day before. "It's been a while," I admitted. He nodded and pressed a button on the dashboard. Mrs. Chen, this is Robert. Could you please have the kitchen prepare something simple for Mr. Henderson? We'll be arriving in about 20 minutes. Someone was preparing food for me. Someone I hadn't seen in 40 years cared enough to make sure I was fed. The contrast with my own son's treatment was so stark, it made my chest ache. Can you tell me anything else about why Mr. Blackwell wants to see me? I asked. Robert glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Sir, I've worked for Mr. Blackwell for 35 years, and in all that time, I've never seen him as focused on finding someone as he has been about finding you. He's been making phone calls, hiring investigators, spending considerable resources. Whatever this is about, it's extremely important to him. The hospital's private wing was like stepping into a different world from the emergency room where I had once taken Dennis for a broken arm. Everything was quiet, elegant, and efficient. Robert led me through hallways lined with original artwork to an elevator that required a special key card. As we rode up to the 10th floor, I tried to prepare myself for seeing Harold again. In my memory, he was a tall, imposing man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had been fair but demanding, expecting excellence from his crews and getting it. I had respected him, but I'm not sure I could say I knew him personally. The elevator doors opened to reveal a single hallway with only 4 doors. Robert led me to the one at the end, knocked softly, and waited for permission to enter. "Come in," came a weak voice from inside. The room was spacious and comfortable, more like a hotel suite than a hospital room, but my attention was immediately drawn to the figure in the bed. Harold Blackwell was ancient now, his once powerful frame reduced to bones and papery skin. But his eyes, those sharp gray eyes, were exactly as I remembered them. "Russell," he said, and his face lit up with something that looked like relief. "You came." I approached the bed slowly, still not understanding what was happening. "Mr. Blackwell, I have to say I'm completely confused about why you wanted to see me." He smiled, a shadow of the commanding presence he had once been. "Sit down, son. We have a lot to talk about, and I'm afraid time is not on our side." I sat in the chair beside his bed, and he studied my face with those penetrating eyes. "First," he said, "I need to apologize. I've been watching you from a distance for years, Russell. I know about your business, your success, your son, and I know about what happened to your company 3 weeks ago. My blood ran cold. You know about the bankruptcy? I know about more than that," he said quietly. "I know about who was behind it. I know about the contracts that were canceled, the loans that were called in, the insurance policies that were suddenly voided, and I know why." I stared at him, my mind racing. "What are you talking about?" Harold's expression grew grave. "Russell, your company didn't fail by accident. It was destroyed deliberately, systematically by someone who wanted to ensure you would lose everything." The room seemed to spin around me. "That's impossible. Who would do that? Why?" Harold reached for a folder on his nightstand with shaking hands. "Because, Russell, someone very close to you has been planning this for a very long time. Someone who stood to gain from your destruction." He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. Even from where I sat, I could see Dennis's signature on several of them. "Your son," Harold said softly, "has been working with a network of people to systematically dismantle everything you built, and I'm afraid that's not even the worst of what I have to tell you." I stared at the documents Harold held, my brain struggling to process what he was telling me. Dennis's signature was clear on multiple pages, but the words seemed to swim before my eyes. My own son had orchestrated my destruction? It was impossible, unthinkable. "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're wrong. Dennis might not be the most supportive son, but he wouldn't deliberately destroy my business. He has no reason to." Harold's eyes filled with something that looked like pity. "Russell, I wish I were wrong. But I've been tracking this for months. Your son has been planning your downfall for over 2 years." He handed me the first document, and I forced myself to focus on the words. It was a contract between Dennis and Hartwell Industries, one of my biggest clients. The contract was dated 8 months ago, long before my business troubles began. In it, Dennis had agreed to provide insider information regarding the operational deficiencies and financial vulnerabilities of Blackwell Construction Services. "He was selling information about my company?" I whispered. "More than that," Harold said, pulling out another document. "He was actively sabotaging it. Look at this one." The second paper was a letter Dennis had written to my insurance company, claiming that I had been cutting safety corners and falsifying inspection reports. It was all lies, but it was written on official letterhead that he had somehow obtained. The language was professional, convincing, and completely fabricated. "Dennis doesn't even work in construction," I said weakly. "How would he know any of this?" "Because he's been planning this for a long time, Russell. He's been asking you questions about your business for years, hasn't he? Casual conversations about contracts, insurance policies, client relationships." My stomach dropped as I remembered dozens of conversations with Dennis where he had shown unusual interest in the details of my business. I had been proud that he was finally taking an interest in what I did, even if he didn't want to join the company. I had answered every question openly, never imagining that the information would be used against me. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why would he do this to me?" Harold pulled out a thick folder and set it on his lap. "Because, Russell, your son believes he's entitled to an inheritance that he thinks you're keeping from him. He and his wife have been living beyond their means for years, accumulating debt while maintaining the lifestyle they believe they deserve." He opened the folder to reveal financial records, bank statements, and credit reports. Dennis owes over $300,000 in credit card debt. Their mortgage is underwater. Jessica's shopping addiction has them borrowing against everything they own. They needed money fast, and they decided you were the solution. I looked at the numbers, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The mortgage on their house, the house I had helped them buy, was indeed underwater. They owed more than the house was worth. Credit cards, personal loans, even a line of credit against Jessica's jewelry. They were drowning financially. "But destroying my company wouldn't help them," I said. "If anything, it would make me less able to help them." Harold's expression grew darker. "Unless they had a plan to profit from your destruction." "Russell, your son has been working with a real estate development company that wanted to acquire your commercial properties at below-market prices. He provided them with insider information about your financial vulnerabilities in exchange for a finder's fee." Another document appeared in front of me. A contract between Dennis and Meridian Development Group, promising him a commission of $500,000 if he could facilitate the acquisition of my business properties for less than 60% of their assessed value. "He sold me out," I said, the words feeling like broken glass in my throat. "My own son sold me out for money." "I'm afraid it gets worse," Harold said gently. "The plan wasn't just to acquire your properties. They wanted to ensure you would have no way to rebuild, no way to compete with them in the future. That's why they worked so hard to destroy your reputation along with your business." He showed me a series of anonymous complaints that had been filed against me with various regulatory agencies. Complaints about unsafe work practices, environmental violations, financial improprieties, all filed by someone with intimate knowledge of my business operations, someone who knew exactly which agencies to contact and what claims would be most damaging. Dennis did this. Dennis and Jessica together, yes. She was the one who researched the legal strategies. Her degree in business administration made her quite effective at understanding how to dismantle a company systematically. I felt like I was drowning. Every revelation was worse than the last, painting a picture of betrayal so complete that I couldn't even begin to process the emotional impact. My son hadn't just abandoned me in my time of need. He had orchestrated that need. "How do you know all this?" I asked. Harold's expression softened slightly. "Because, Russell, I've been watching over you for 42 years, ever since you saved my life." I stared at him blankly. "I saved your life? I don't remember anything like that." "December 15th, 1981, you were working on the Morrison building project, remember? I was the site supervisor, and there was an accident with the crane." The memory came flooding back. The crane had been lifting a steel beam to the 8th floor when the cable snapped. Harold had been standing directly underneath it, reviewing blueprints, completely unaware of the danger. I had tackled him out of the way just as the beam crashed down where he had been standing. "That was just instinct," I said. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "But anyone didn't do it," Harold said firmly. "You did. And that beam would have killed me instantly. You risked your own life to save mine, without hesitation, without thought for your own safety." I remembered the incident now, but I had never thought of it as particularly heroic. It had happened so fast that I had acted purely on instinct. "Russell, you saved the life of a man who went on to build one of the largest construction companies on the East Coast. Blackwell Industries is now worth over $800 million, and all of it exists because you were brave enough to push me out of the way of a falling steel beam." My head was spinning. Harold Blackwell wasn't just my former supervisor. He was Harold Blackwell of Blackwell Industries, one of the most successful construction magnates in the country. "I've been investing in your company quietly for years," Harold continued. "Silent partnerships, anonymous loans during tough times, contracts steered your way through intermediaries. I've been trying to repay the debt I owed you for my life." "You invested in my company?" "For over 20 years, yes. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as your business grew. I was so proud watching you build something from nothing, seeing you succeed through your own hard work and integrity." I thought back over the years, remembering times when unexpected contracts had appeared just when I needed them, when loans had been approved despite my limited collateral, when problems had resolved themselves in ways that seemed almost miraculous. "The Hartwell Industries contract," I said slowly. 5 years ago, when they chose my company over 3 larger competitors. That was you?" Harold nodded. "I recommended you personally to their board of directors. But Russell, you earned that contract. You did excellent work for them. All I did was open the door." I felt a strange mix of gratitude and humiliation. My success hadn't been entirely my own. I had been helped by someone I didn't even know was helping me. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because you needed to believe in yourself, to know that your success was real. If you had known about my involvement, you might have doubted your own abilities. I wanted you to succeed on your own merits." Harold pulled out another folder, this one much thicker than the others. "But when I learned what Dennis was planning, I tried to protect you. I attempted to shore up your finances, to counter the damage he was doing. But he was very thorough, and he had inside information that allowed him to stay one step ahead of my efforts." I looked at the documents he was showing me now. Bank transfers, loan guarantees, emergency credit lines that had been established and then mysteriously canceled. Harold had been fighting a shadow war to save my company, while my own son had been working just as hard to destroy it. "He won," I said bitterly. "Dennis won. I lost everything." "No, Russell, he didn't win. Because there's something Dennis doesn't know, something he could never have anticipated." Harold reached for a final document, this one sealed in an envelope. His hands trembled as he held it out to me. "What's this?" "My will, Russell. The reason I asked you here tonight. I'm dying, probably within the next few days, and I need witnesses to sign this document before I pass." I looked at the envelope, confused. "Why me? Surely you have family, friends who would be more appropriate." Harold's face grew sad. "I have a son and 2 daughters, Russell. All 3 of them have been circling like vultures, waiting for me to die so they can inherit my money. None of them have spoken to me in years except to ask for advances on their inheritance. They don't love me. They love what I can give them." The parallel to my own situation was not lost on me. We were 2 old men who had built successful lives but failed to raise children who loved them for who they were rather than what they could provide. "But you, Russell, you never asked me for anything. You saved my life and then forgot about it, went on with your own life, never expecting anything in return. In all these years, you never once tried to contact me or leverage our connection for your benefit." I remained silent, still struggling to understand where this was heading. "That's why you're the only person I trust to witness this will. because you have no stake in its contents, no reason to challenge or contest what I've decided." Harold's eyes met mine, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. "Russell, I'm leaving everything to you, my entire estate, $800 million plus all the assets and ongoing business interests of Blackwell Industries. You're going to be one of the wealthiest men in America." The world seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he had just said. "That's impossible," I whispered. "You can't leave everything to me. I'm not family. I'm just someone who used to work for you." "You're the only person who ever treated me like a human being instead of a bank account," Harold said firmly. "And more than that, Russell, you're going to need this money for what comes next." "What comes next?" Harold's expression hardened, and suddenly I could see the ruthless businessman he must have been in his prime. "You're going to make Dennis pay for what he did to you, and by the time you're finished, he's going to understand exactly what it means to betray family." I sat in stunned silence as Harold's words echoed in my mind. $800 million. The number was so large it seemed abstract, meaningless. 3 days ago I had been sleeping in my car, and now this man was telling me I would inherit a fortune that could change not just my life, but the lives of generations to come. "I can't accept this," I said finally. "Your children, your real family, they'll contest the will. They'll claim you weren't in your right mind, that I manipulated you somehow." Harold smiled, and for a moment I could see the sharp businessman he had been. "Let them try. I've had the best lawyers in the country working on this will for months. Every possible challenge has been anticipated and addressed. Medical evaluations proving my mental competency, video depositions explaining my reasoning, financial records showing our history together. They can contest it, but they won't win." He reached for another folder, this one containing what looked like surveillance photographs. "Besides, my children aren't exactly in a position to claim moral high ground. Would you like to see what my loving family has been up to while waiting for me to die?" The first photo showed a woman in her 50s, expensively dressed, coming out of a casino in Atlantic City. "My daughter Catherine," Harold explained. "She's been gambling away her trust fund for years. Last month alone, she lost over $200,000 at blackjack. She's been asking me for advances on her inheritance to cover her gambling debts." The next photo showed a man about Dennis's age in what appeared to be a heated argument with someone outside a high-end restaurant. "My son, Harold Jr. He's been using my name to secure loans he can't repay, telling creditors that his inheritance will cover everything when I die. He owes over $5 million to various banks and private lenders." The third photo was of another woman, younger than Catherine, embracing a man who was clearly not her husband. "Margaret, my youngest. She's been having an affair for 3 years while her husband thinks they're working on their marriage. She wants her inheritance early so she can leave him and start a new life with her lover." I looked at the photos, seeing the bitter irony. Harold's legitimate children were every bit as selfish and destructive as my son had proven to be. "The difference," Harold said, reading my thoughts, "is that you're surprised and hurt by Dennis's betrayal. I've known what my children were for years. I kept hoping they would change, that somewhere inside them was a spark of the values I tried to teach them. But they never did." He put the photos away and looked directly at me. "You, on the other hand, raised your son to have opportunities, to make good choices. The fact that he chose betrayal instead doesn't reflect on you, it reflects on him." "But why give me everything? Why not a charity or scholarship foundation or something that would benefit more people?" "Because, Russell, I have a specific purpose for this money. I want you to use it to right the wrongs that have been done, starting with your son's betrayal." Harold opened yet another folder, this one containing what looked like a detailed investigation report. "My private investigators have been tracking Dennis and Jessica's activities for months. What I've told you so far is only the beginning." I braced myself for more revelations, not sure how much more I could handle. "Dennis didn't just sabotage your business, Russell. He's been stealing from you directly for over 3 years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as he got bolder. The documents showed a pattern of forged invoices, fictitious contractors, and padded expenses that had been submitted to my company's accounting department. Someone with access to my business systems had been systematically siphoning money from my accounts. How? I asked weakly. Remember when Dennis offered to help you modernize your bookkeeping system? When he convinced you to switch to that new computer program? I remembered. Dennis had been unusually helpful that summer, insisting that my old paper-based system was costing me money and efficiency. He had recommended a software package and even offered to help train my bookkeeper on the new system. He installed backdoor access into your accounting software, Harold explained. Every transaction went through systems he could monitor and manipulate. He knew exactly when you received payments, when bills were due, what your cash flow looked like at any given time. I felt sick. Dennis had used my trust in him to gain access to the most sensitive aspects of my business, then used that access to rob me blind. The investigators estimate he stole approximately $175,000 over 3 years. Always small enough amounts that they wouldn't be immediately noticed, spread across different accounts and categories. $175,000, money I had earned through honest work, money that could have helped me weather the storm when the larger attacks on my business began. Money my son had stolen from me while pretending to care about my success. There's more, Harold said grimly. Dennis has been using your business information to bid against you on contracts. He would learn about projects you were pursuing, then provide that information to your competitors in exchange for finder's fees. The documents showed a clear pattern. Dennis would visit me for Sunday dinner, ask casual questions about upcoming projects, then within days, my competitors would submit bids that undercut mine by margins so small they suggested inside information. The Morrison renovation project last year, I said, remembering my frustration at losing a contract I was sure I would win. I couldn't understand how Hartwell Construction knew to bid exactly $3,000 less than me. Because Dennis told them your bid amount, Harold confirmed. He received a $10,000 payment for that information. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of my son's betrayal. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a single act of desperation. This was a systematic, long-term campaign to destroy everything I had built. Why? Asked again. Even if he needed money, even if he was in debt, why not just ask me for help? I would have given him anything. Harold's expression softened. Because that would have required him to admit his failures, to acknowledge that he needed help. Dennis and Jessica have built their entire identity around being successful, independent, better than their blue-collar roots. Asking for help would have shattered that illusion. So instead they decided to steal from me and then destroy what was left. More than that, Harold said. They decided you deserved what happened to you. Jessica, in particular, has been telling people for years that you're an unsophisticated old man who got lucky in business but never deserved the success you achieved. He pulled out a transcript of what appeared to be a recorded phone conversation. This is from 2 weeks ago, a call between Jessica and her sister. I read the transcript with growing horror. Jessica was complaining about how unfair it was that Russell has all this money while we struggle to pay our bills. She referred to me as that stubborn old fool and said that someone needs to teach him that he can't hold on to everything forever. Most damaging of all, she had told her sister that Dennis and I deserve that money more than Russell does. We're young, we're educated, we know how to use money properly. Russell would just waste it on his pathetic little projects. She actually believes they're entitled to my money, I said in disbelief. They both do. In their minds, you're just a temporary guardian of wealth that rightfully belongs to them. They see themselves as sophisticated people who have been forced to wait too long for their inheritance. Harold pulled out one final set of documents. Which brings us to their ultimate plan. Russell, destroying your business was never the end goal, it was just the first step. I looked at the papers he handed me, my blood running cold as I read. It was a power of attorney document with my name on it, but I had never signed it. Below that was a will that I had also never signed, leaving everything I owned to Dennis. They forged your signature? They practiced for months, Harold said. Jessica bought examples of legal documents online and studied the requirements for financial power of attorney. Dennis has been perfecting your signature using samples from birthday cards and other documents you signed over the years. I studied the forged documents more closely. The signatures were good, very good. If I hadn't known they were fake, I might have believed I had signed them myself. Their plan was to wait until you were completely destitute, then approach you with an offer to help. They would offer to let you live in their house, provide for your basic needs in exchange for signing over legal authority to manage your affairs. But I don't have any affairs left to manage, I said bitterly. You have life insurance, Harold pointed out. Social Security benefits, any remaining assets from the bankruptcy proceedings, and more importantly, you have the ability to make medical decisions for yourself. The implication hit me like a physical blow. They were planning to have me declared incompetent. Jessica has been researching elder care laws and conservatorship proceedings. Once they had power of attorney, they could have you evaluated by doctors who would declare you mentally unfit to manage your own affairs. Then they would control every aspect of your life. I thought about that first night at Dennis's house when Jessica had suggested I contact social services. I had thought it was cold and heartless, but now I realized it might have been part of a larger plan, make me desperate enough to accept any help they offered, no matter what strings were attached. They would have kept you alive as long as legally necessary, Harold continued quietly, but you would have lived entirely at their mercy. Every decision about your health care, your living arrangements, your finances would have been theirs to make. I felt a cold rage building in my chest, different from the hurt and confusion I had felt before. This was calculated, methodical evil. My own son had planned to essentially imprison me, to steal not just my money but my dignity and independence. The beautiful irony, Harold said, is that Dennis's greed made him impatient. If he had waited, if he had just been a good son and inherited your modest estate naturally, he would have been fine. But he wanted everything immediately, and his attempts to speed up the process led him to destroy the very thing he was trying to possess. I looked at Harold, this dying old man who had been fighting a war I didn't even know was being waged. What happens now? Harold smiled, and there was something almost predatory in his expression. Now, Russell, we give Dennis exactly what he's been working so hard to achieve. We're going to let him destroy his father completely. What do you mean? Dennis thinks he's won, that you're beaten and helpless. He doesn't know that I exist, doesn't know about the inheritance you're about to receive. So we're going to let him think he's succeeded, let him move forward with his plans, and then we're going to show him what real power looks like. Harold reached for a legal document I hadn't seen before. But first you need to sign this will, and I need witnesses to confirm that I'm of sound mind and acting of my own free will. I looked at the document, still struggling to accept that this was really happening. In a matter of hours, I would go from being a homeless failure to being one of the wealthiest men in the country. What about your children? I asked. What about the moral obligation to leave something to family? Harold's expression hardened. My children had 40 years to earn my love and respect. They chose to earn my contempt instead. You, Russell, earned my gratitude and loyalty. In a single moment of selfless courage, and you've spent the decades since proving that my judgment was correct. He gestured toward the document. Besides, I'm not leaving them nothing. Each of my children will receive exactly $1 from my state, enough to prove that I didn't forget them. They were simply found unworthy of more. I picked up the pen with trembling hands. 42 years after saving a man's life in a moment of instinct, I was about to inherit the consequences of that split-second decision. As I signed my name to the witness line, Harold smiled with deep satisfaction. Now, he said, let's discuss exactly how we're going to make Dennis pay for what he's done to you. Harold passed away peacefully 3 days later. I was sitting beside his bed when it happened, watching the monitors as his vital signs slowly faded away. He had refused all life-extending measures, saying he had accomplished what he needed to accomplish, and was ready to go. His last words to me were, "Make them understand what family really means, Russell." The funeral was a circus. Harold's children arrived like they were attending a business meeting, each accompanied by lawyers and accountants. They barely glanced at their father's casket, too busy whispering among themselves about the will reading scheduled for the following day. I sat in the back of the funeral home, unnoticed and unrecognized, watching three people mourn the loss of their inheritance rather than their father. Catherine, Harold's eldest daughter, delivered a eulogy that sounded like it had been written by a public relations firm. She spoke about her father's business achievements and philanthropic endeavors, but never once mentioned a personal memory or moment of genuine affection. Harold Jr. looked bored throughout the entire service, checking his phone repeatedly. Margaret cried, but I got the impression her tears were more about her financial future than any real grief. The lawyer, David Morrison, found me after the service. He was a distinguished man in his 70s who had been Harold's attorney for over 30 years. "Mr. Henderson," he said quietly, "I need you to know that the next few weeks are going to be extremely difficult. When Harold's children learn about the will tomorrow, they're going to be furious. They may try to investigate you to find some way to challenge Harold's decision." I nodded, still feeling surreal about the entire situation. "I understand." "Harold was very thorough in his preparations," Morrison continued. "Every aspect of this will has been legally bulletproofed, but that doesn't mean they won't try to make your life miserable while they exhaust their legal options." The will reading took place in Morrison's law office the following morning. Harold's three children sat across from me at a polished conference table, their lawyers flanking them like bodyguards. They kept glancing at me with obvious confusion, clearly wondering why some shabby old man was included in their family's private business. Morrison cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Harold James Blackwell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The standard legal language continued for several minutes before Morrison reached the substantive portions. Harold's children leaned forward expectantly, probably already mentally spending their inheritances. "To my daughter, Catherine Elizabeth Blackwell, I leave the sum of $1 to be paid within 30 days of my death." Catherine's face went white. "What?" "To my son, Harold James Blackwell, Jr., I leave the sum of $1 to be paid within 30 days of my death." Harold Jr. shot to his feet. "This is impossible. He can't be serious." "To my daughter, Margaret Rose Blackwell, I leave the sum of $1 to be paid within 30 days of my death." Margaret began crying, but these were tears of rage, not sorrow. Morrison continued reading as chaos erupted around the table. Lawyers were conferring in urgent whispers, Harold's children were demanding explanations, and I sat in stunned silence as the reality of what was happening sank in. The remainder of my estate, including all business holdings, real estate, investments, and personal property, I leave in its entirety to Russell Henderson, who saved my life on December 15, 1981, and who has proven himself to be a man of integrity and honor. The room exploded. Catherine was screaming that the will was invalid, that I had manipulated their father. Harold Jr. was threatening to sue everyone in sight. Margaret was sobbing hysterically, claiming that her father had lost his mind. But through all the chaos, Morrison calmly continued reading Harold's final message. "To my children, who may question this decision, I say this. You had your entire lives to earn my respect and affection. You chose instead to see me only as a source of money. Russell Henderson never asked me for anything, never expected anything from me, and yet he gave me the most precious gift of all, my life. He has earned what you merely expected." The legal battles began immediately, just as Morrison had predicted. Harold's children filed challenges claiming everything from mental incompetence to undue influence to outright fraud. But Harold had been thorough in his preparations. The will had been reviewed by multiple attorneys, witnessed by respected community members, and accompanied by comprehensive medical evaluations proving his mental competency. More importantly, Harold had documented our entire history together. He had preserved records of the accident that brought us together, photographs from the construction site, witness statements from other workers who had been present that day. He had even tracked down the hospital records from his treatment after the incident. The courts dismissed every challenge within 6 weeks. Harold's fortune was mine. but I wasn't ready to claim it yet. I was still living in a modest hotel room, trying to process everything that had happened while Morrison's firm managed the complex transfer of assets. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to handle what came next. That's when Morrison called me with news that changed everything. "Russell," he said, "there's something Harold wanted me to tell you, but only after the inheritance was finalized and the legal challenges had been resolved." I braced myself for another revelation. After everything I had learned about Harold's preparations, I knew there had to be more. "Harold didn't just leave you his fortune," Morrison continued. "He's been quietly acquiring assets connected to your life for the past several months, properties, businesses, debts. He wanted to ensure that when the time came, you would have all the tools you needed to address the wrongs that had been done to you." "What kind of assets?" "Well, for starters, Harold bought the mortgage on your son's house." I felt my heart skip a beat. "He owns Dennis's house?" "You own Dennis's house," Morrison corrected. "The mortgage was transferred to one of Harold's subsidiary companies 3 months ago. Dennis has been making his payments to Harold's bank, never knowing that the money was going to the man he betrayed." The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Dennis thought he had destroyed me, left me homeless and helpless, while unknowingly paying rent to the man whose life I had saved 4 decades earlier. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Harold also acquired the debt collection rights to several of Dennis and Jessica's credit accounts. Technically, you now hold over $200,000 of their outstanding debt." I sat in silence, trying to absorb what this meant. I didn't just have Harold's fortune, I had direct financial control over my son's life. "Harold left detailed instructions about how he hoped you would use these assets," Morrison said. "He called it education through consequences. He believed that Dennis needed to learn what it felt like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy." That afternoon, I drove to Dennis's house for the first time since that awful night when he had turned me away. I parked across the street and sat in my rental car, studying the property that I now owned. The house looked the same, well-maintained and expensive, a symbol of the success Dennis thought he had achieved through his own efforts. I thought about Harold's plan, about the justice of giving Dennis exactly what he had tried to give me. He had wanted to control every aspect of my life, to reduce me to a helpless dependent, living entirely at his mercy. Now the tables were turned, and he didn't even know it yet. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Morrison. "The foreclosure papers are ready whenever you want to proceed. Just say the word." I could do it. I could foreclose on Dennis's house, call in his debts, and leave him as homeless and desperate as he had left me. The legal right was mine, and the moral justification was clear. He had earned this treatment through his own choices. But as I sat there looking at the house where my son lived, I realized that Harold had given me something more valuable than just the means for revenge. He had given me the power to choose what kind of man I wanted to be. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard between Dennis and Jessica that night when they turned me away. "Dad was so generous to pay for my wedding, but honestly, I think that's only natural," Jessica had said. Of course, Hunter nodded. Dad always prioritizes the kids with potential. They saw me as weak, as someone who could be discarded without consequence. But weakness and mercy were not the same thing. It took more strength to choose compassion than it did to choose revenge. I pulled out my phone and called Morrison. "David," I said, "I want you to send Dennis a letter, but not foreclosure papers, something else entirely." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to offer him a choice," I said, watching the house where my son lived his oblivious life. "The same choice he offered me, but with a very different outcome." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Harold thought you might choose this path," he said finally. "He hoped you would, actually. He said true justice wasn't about punishment, but about giving people the opportunity to understand what they had done. Can you arrange a meeting?" "Absolutely. Where would you like to meet them?" I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. The answer was obvious. "Here," I said. "At their house tomorrow evening. Tell them their mortgage company needs to meet with them about some irregularities in their account." It was time for Dennis and Jessica to learn what it felt like when someone they had never heard of suddenly had the power to change their entire life. The next evening, I sat in Dennis's living room for the first time in years. The furniture was expensive, tasteful, exactly what I would have expected from Jessica's refined sensibilities. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, but I noticed that none of them included me. I had been erased from their family narrative long before they erased me from their lives. Dennis and Jessica sat across from me on their leather sofa, looking nervous and confused. They still didn't recognize me. I was wearing an expensive suit now, my hair was properly cut, and I carried myself with the confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the power in a situation. Morrison sat beside me with a briefcase full of documents, playing his role as the representative from their mortgage company. He had introduced me simply as Mr. Russell, an investor who had recently acquired their loan. "I don't understand," Jessica was saying. "Our mortgage payments have always been on time. We've never had any problems with the account." "The issue isn't with your payments," Morrison explained. "It's with the change in ownership of your loan. New ownership means new terms, and Mr. Russell has some concerns about the long-term viability of this particular mortgage." Dennis leaned forward, his salesman instincts kicking in. "What kind of concerns? Our income is stable, our credit is good. We're excellent borrowers." I studied my son's face, noting the lines of stress around his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. He was afraid, and he had good reason to be. His financial house of cards was more precarious than he wanted to admit. "Mr. Henderson," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering their home. Dennis frowned. "I'm sorry?" "Your father, Russell Henderson. I believe you know him." The color drained from Dennis's face as recognition dawned. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and growing fear. "Dad," Dennis whispered. I nodded slowly, savoring the moment when their world shifted beneath them. "Hello, son. We need to talk." The silence in the room was deafening. Dennis stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost, while Jessica had gone completely pale, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the armrest of their expensive sofa. I could see their minds racing, trying to understand how the broken old man they had turned away was now sitting in their living room, wearing a $1,000 suit and holding the deed to their house. "This isn't possible," Jessica whispered. "You were sleeping in your car. You lost everything." "Did I?" I asked calmly. Morrison opened his briefcase and began laying documents on their coffee table. "Let me show you exactly what I have, and then you can decide whether I lost everything or gained something far more valuable." Dennis leaned forward, his face a mixture of confusion and growing dread as Morrison spread out the papers. Mortgage documents showing their house was now owned by Henderson Holdings, LLC. Credit statements showing their outstanding debts had been purchased by the same company. Business records showing that every major debt they carried was now under my control. "You own our house?" Dennis asked, his voice barely audible. "I own your house," I confirmed. "I own your credit card debt. I own the loan on Jessica's car. I own the line of credit you used to buy that expensive engagement ring. I own every significant financial obligation you have." Jessica started crying, but I felt no satisfaction in her tears. There was no joy in watching my son's world crumble, only a grim sense of justice finally being served. "How?" Dennis asked. "How is this possible?" "Do you remember Harold Blackwell?" I asked. Dennis shook his head blankly, but I hadn't expected him to recognize the name. He had been too young when I worked for Harold, and I had never talked much about my early career. "Harold Blackwell was my supervisor 42 years ago when I was just starting in construction. I saved his life in an industrial accident, and he never forgot it. He spent the next 4 decades quietly helping me build my business, protecting me when he could, supporting me in ways I never even knew about." I pulled out Harold's investigation file and set it on the table. "He also spent the last year of his life documenting every crime you committed against me, Dennis. Every forged invoice, every stolen dollar, every piece of sabotage you orchestrated to destroy my company." Dennis's face went ashen as he recognized some of the documents in the file. "Dad, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked. "Can you explain why you stole $175,000 from me over 3 years? Can you explain why you sold information about my business to my competitors? Can you explain why you worked with real estate developers to destroy my company so they could acquire my properties at a fraction of their value? Each revelation hit Dennis like a physical blow. Jessica was sobbing openly now, and I could see her mentally calculating the legal consequences of what I was describing. Can you explain, I continued, my voice growing colder, why you forged my signature on legal documents, why you planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could control every aspect of my life, why you conspired to turn me into a prisoner in my own home? We never meant for it to go that far, Jessica protested through her tears. We just needed money. We were drowning in debt, and you had so much. It seemed unfair. Unfair, I repeated. You thought it was unfair that I had money I earned through 40 years of honest work. So unfair that you decided to steal it from me and then destroy me when I had nothing left to give? Dennis finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Dad, we made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we can fix this. We can pay you back. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Pay me back? Dennis, you owe me far more than money. You owe me 40 years of being a son instead of a predator. You owe me the respect and love that every father hopes to receive from his child. Morrison cleared his throat and pulled out another document. Your son and daughter-in-law also owe you an explanation for this, he said, sliding a paper across the table. It was the forged power of attorney they had prepared, the one that would have given them legal control over my life if their plan had succeeded. Seeing it again made my chest tighten with rage. You were going to imprison me, I said quietly. You were going to take away every shred of dignity and independence I had left, all so you could control my Social Security benefits and life insurance policy. Dennis couldn't meet my eyes. Jessica had stopped crying and was staring at the documents with the calculating expression I had learned to recognize. Even now, even caught red-handed, she was looking for angles, for ways to minimize the damage. What do you want? She asked, finally. Money. We'll pay you back every penny with interest. What I want, I said, standing up and walking to their fireplace, is for you to understand what you almost did to me. What you actually succeeded in doing before Harold's intervention saved me. I turned back to face them, and for the first time since entering their house, I let them see the full weight of my anger. You turned your own father into a homeless old man sleeping in his car, shivering in the cold, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. You destroyed everything I had built, everything I was proud of, everything I had planned to leave to you. You stole my dignity, my security, my faith in the people who were supposed to love me. Dennis was crying now, ugly sobs that shook his shoulders. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know why I did those things. I know why, I said. Because you thought I was weak. Because you thought I would never fight back. Because you thought family meant I would always forgive you no matter what you did to me. I walked back to the sofa and sat down, looking directly at my son. But here's what you never understood, Dennis. Family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and loyalty, and you lost the right to call yourself my family the day you decided to destroy me. The room fell silent except for Jessica's quiet sniffling and Dennis's labored breathing. I let the silence stretch, let them marinate in their fear and regret before I continued. Now, I said, I'm going to give you a choice. The same choice you gave me when you planned to control my life, but with very different options. Morrison pulled out a final set of documents, the ones I had spent the previous day reviewing with Harold's legal team. Option 1, I said. I exercise my legal rights as your creditor. I foreclose on this house immediately. I call in all your debts which you cannot pay, forcing you into bankruptcy. I provide the evidence of your crimes to the district attorney's office, and you spend the next several years in prison for fraud, forgery, and theft. Dennis looked like he was going to be sick. Jessica was staring at me with something approaching terror. Option 2, I continued. You accept the terms I'm about to offer you, and you spend the rest of your lives earning back even a fraction of what you destroyed. I nodded to Morrison, who slid the final document across the table. This is a contract, I explained. By signing it, you acknowledge your crimes against me and agree to make restitution. You will sell this house and move into a modest apartment. You will surrender your expensive cars and buy used vehicles. You will close your credit accounts and live on a strict budget that I will monitor." Dennis picked up the contract with shaking hands, reading the terms with growing disbelief. "You will both take second jobs to maximize your income," I continued. 60% of everything. You earn above basic living expenses will go toward repaying what you stole from me, plus interest. This arrangement will continue for the next 20 years. 20 years? Jessica gasped. "The same amount of time it took me to build the business you destroyed," I said. "But here's the most important part. Every month you will send me a handwritten letter explaining what you've learned about the consequences of betraying family. You will detail how your actions affected not just me, but yourselves, your marriage, your future." I leaned forward, making sure they understood the gravity of what I was offering. "If you complete this arrangement, if you show genuine remorse and make real changes in your character, then at the end of 20 years you will be forgiven. Your debt will be cleared, and you can attempt to rebuild the relationship you destroyed." "And if we refuse?" Dennis asked weakly. "Then I destroy you completely," I said without hesitation. "Everything I mentioned in option 1 happens immediately. You lose your house, your freedom, and any chance of redemption." Dennis and Jessica looked at each other, communicating silently in the way that couples do. I could see them weighing their options, calculating whether they could find some other way out of this situation. "There is no third option," I said, reading their thoughts. "There is no appeal, no negotiation, no escape clause. You have exactly 5 minutes to decide." The 5 minutes felt like an hour. Dennis read and reread the contract while Jessica whispered frantically in his ear. I watched them with detached interest, noting how even now, even facing the consequences of their betrayal, their first instinct was to look for a way to avoid accountability. Finally, Dennis picked up the pen Morrison had provided. "We'll sign," he said, his voice barely audible. "We'll accept your terms." As Dennis signed his name to the contract, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but a deep, profound sadness. This should have been a moment of triumph, but all I could think about was the little boy who used to wait for me to come home from work, who would run to greet me at the door with his arms outstretched. That little boy was gone, had been gone for years, and I was finally accepting that he was never coming back. But as I watched Dennis hand the signed contract to Morrison, I also realized something else. For the first time in months, I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had been consuming me since that night when they turned me away had finally burned itself out, leaving behind something cleaner and stronger. Justice. Not revenge, but justice. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my new home, a modest but beautiful house overlooking a lake in New Hampshire. Harold's inheritance had made me wealthy beyond my wildest dreams, but I had discovered that money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was peace, dignity, and the knowledge that I had chosen to be better than the people who had wronged me. Dennis and Jessica had sold their house and moved into a small apartment across town. They were both working 2 jobs, slowly paying back what they had stolen from me. Their monthly letters had started as resentful acknowledgments of their situation, but gradually they had begun to show signs of genuine reflection and remorse. I wasn't sure if our relationship would ever be truly repaired, but I had given them the opportunity to try. That was more than they had given me, and it was enough. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Morrison with an update on Dennis's progress. "The monthly payment came in on time," he reported. "And Russell, you should read this month's letter. I think Dennis is finally beginning to understand what he put you through." I had Morrison email me the letter, and I read it sitting on my deck as the sun set over the lake. "Dad," it began, "I wake up every morning thinking about the night we turned you away. I try to imagine what it felt like to be you, standing at our door with nowhere else to go and being rejected by the son you had given everything to. I can't imagine it because I don't think I'm strong enough to survive what we put you through." The letter went on for several pages, describing the humiliation of working multiple jobs, the stress of living paycheck to paycheck, the strain it was putting on his marriage to Jessica. But more importantly, it described his growing understanding of what I had endured and his genuine remorse for the choices he had made. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," the letter concluded, "but I want you to know that I'm not the same man who betrayed you. Every day I try to become someone worthy of being called your son again. I don't know if I'll ever succeed, but I won't stop trying." I folded the letter and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. Harold had been right. True justice wasn't about punishment. It was about giving people the opportunity to understand what they had done and choose to become better. Dennis might never fully earn back my love and trust, but he was trying. That was more than I had dared to hope for during those dark days when I was sleeping in my car. I had started with nothing and built a successful business. I had lost everything and gained a fortune. I had been betrayed by my family and found redemption through an unexpected friendship. But most importantly, I had learned that the measure of a man isn't what happens to him, but how he chooses to respond to what happens to him. I chose forgiveness over revenge, justice over destruction, hope over despair, and for the first time in my life, I was truly free.